Good morning. If I can have everybody take their seats, please. Hey, don't be playing with his leg. Don't be playing with his leg. I didn't put those out. Why is it? Is it misspelled or something? Hey, Dave, can we go ahead and close the doors? All right, let's get started. Good morning, everybody. Man, that sounded dead. Good morning, everybody. Thank you. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. My name is Andy Ball. And as Davis County Emergency Management Director, we welcome you. It's an honor for us to host this commemoration in remembrance of the January 3rd, 2000 tornado. Today is exactly 20 years since the F3 tornado's 180-mile-an-hour winds ripped through our community around 4:06 p.m., injuring around 20, damaging over 2,000 buildings, including around 100 homes destroyed. 20% of Davis County was without power, millions of dollars in damage across a 7-mile-long, half-mile swath. The greatest number to remember, though, was that there were 0 fatalities, and for that we are gracious. During the course of gathering information and photos for this commemoration, many have told me their story. From a father driving across town to ensure his daughter wasn't alone at school, to falling trees barely missing drivers, from bank workers filling vaults for shelter, to students filling schools' hallways. The one constant I heard in their voices was fear. Fear for their lives and fear for their loved ones. Fear they will remember probably until their final breath. I'm sure many of you here today have memories of that same fear, and hopefully we'll hear some stories after the end of the ceremony. We do not come together, though, today to relive that fear, but rather to celebrate life and how a community such as Owensboro came together. With that being said, please stand if there are any first responders, volunteer agencies, medical providers, or government employees which responded to or helped recover from this event. Everybody give them a round of applause, please. Thank you. In a moment, we'll hear from former Judge Executive Reed Hare and former Mayor and City Manager Ron Payne as they discuss their stories of their involvement in this event. Warning Coordination Meteorologist Rick Shanklin of the National Weather Service Paducah office will follow up with a brief event overview, followed by closing remarks from my predecessor, Richard Payne. Following Richard, Judge Executive Al Mattingly will lead our audience participation, where audience and media members will have up to two minutes each to speak, relating their experiences or to ask questions. Please be courteous to others by limiting comments to 2 minutes or less. You will notice we have displays around the room, as well as picture slides and video to the rear. Please feel free following the ceremony to walk around and view the various pictures and stories that we have, as well as we'll have a 13-minute video playing up here from Wayne Hart off of YouTube. Many of you have probably watched before. Let these displays be a reminder that disasters can strike at any time, and we must prepare ourselves, our family, our workplaces and neighborhoods for the next big disaster. Special thanks to the citizens and agencies who provided photos and stories, all of our speakers here in the front row, my staff, especially Tracy and Dave. They've done a real good job, I think, of putting all these displays together. All of our officials here on the second row, our media partners for the good coverage and marketing, department leads, and KWC for hosting this momentous event. We also thank each of you for taking time out of your busy schedule on a Friday to bond together in remembrance of this terrible event. With that being said, please welcome former Judge Executive Reed Hare, followed by former Mayor and City Manager Ron Payne.
Thank you for the invitation to be here today. My comments will be fairly brief. Andy gives the former mayor and I 5 minutes, and that's totally unacceptable, but we'll have to abide by those rules. There's not much more I can say to add to the great article that Jim Mays put in the paper today about the challenges that we faced 20 years ago with the advent of that tornado. But there are a couple of points that I'd like to bring up. You get some realizations once this happened, realizations that you don't normally think. You know that there are challenges and problems and with the destruction and the disaster that occurred. Well, we were faced with several issues. We were certainly fortunate to have OMPC, Owensboro Metropolitan Planning Commission. Why? Well, thieves and charlatans show up when people have a disaster. We had individuals coming into town from out of state who would take advantage of those who needed a roof or needed a wall or needed some assistance. And they would take their money and leave. Were it not for planning and zoning issuing permits to the reputable builders, individuals would have been soaked for many more dollars than what they already were. The second realization that came to me were the volunteers, not just local volunteers. One of our biggest challenges was we had more volunteers than work that needed to be done. We had hundreds of people coming from all over the country to try and lend a hand to support people and support individuals and do their part to rebuild the community. Amazing the number of volunteers that we had to try and orchestrate and deal with. And thirdly, the resiliency of not only the citizens of Owensboro, but the residents of those properties that were destroyed and disturbed. It was amazing how people came together. You can drive through that area today, and except for maybe the stump of a tree, no sign that any of this devastation took place. Amazing how we came together and rebuilt the community. This happened 20 years ago. About 80 years ago, a French author, Albert Camus, wrote, "By tragedy, all men are brothers." This was so evident with the incidents and the devastation that occurred over 20 years ago. We came together as a community, we came together as a county, we came together as a state to rebuild and to demonstrate our resiliency. I want to give a recognition to the mayor at that time, Wayman Morse. Wayman's no longer with us, but his determination and his commitment and his love of this community was a guiding force in our rebuilding efforts. I've had the privilege of working with 3 mayors during my term of office: Wayman Morse, Tom Watson, and Ron Payne. And each of them showed that undying commitment to this community. We've been extremely fortunate. And I've been fortunate. And quite honestly, I'd take a bullet for any one of them. Well, maybe just one in the arm for Ron. He was a little cantankerous. And so I thank you, Andy, for inviting me here today. It was a harrowing experience, but one that I learned a lot, not only as judge executive, but as a person, about the strength and the determination of this community. And so I will introduce our next speaker, who was city manager at the time. I recognize Bob Whitmer out there. Bob was intimately involved in this as well. So thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation. Ron Payne.
You know, I got to tell you, when Jim Mays called me and wanted to talk to me about the tornado, I'd all but forgotten it. That was 20 years ago. But once he did that and I started to think, a lot of things came back. And I've got to tell you, that event was the toughest thing that I dealt with as city manager. But before I get into these other remarks, one of the real assets for me as city manager was the city staff, the police, the fire, the public works, and the judge mentioned Bob. Bob, stand up. Everybody needs to see you if they don't know you. Come on, stand up there, my man. Bob was my assistant at that time, and I've got to tell you, he led the effort to clean this city up. And I got to tell you, that was one tremendous job. Some of you will probably remember the mounds of stuff at the sports center. But we learned Bob did a yeoman's job. Of course, he always does whatever he takes on. But we got a lot of accolades for how we handled that. And we learned a lot. And it paid dividends when we had that ice storm. I wore this hat today. I know several of the city employees have them. Bob left his at home. It says Tornado 2000, saw it, felt it, worked it. And I think this summarizes everything that can be said about that tornado and the people in this community. You know, we all saw it. We either saw it coming or we saw the effects of it. Going down Tamarack and Frederica that night with Fire Chief Fred Hina, who's no longer with us, I'll never forget that eerie feeling. We were sure, we were confident there were going to be fatalities, especially in that Apollo area. You'll see the pictures and you'll understand why I say that. It was such a miracle. No one lost their lives in that event that night. But also, the days after that tornado, it was still a dangerous place in certain parts of this city. There were power lines down everywhere. There were gas lines, debris. But our public safety people, I mean, they did a yeoman's job. And I'll never forget the helicopter ride I took the next morning. The head of the National Guard came in here and offered to give me a ride around, and just what I saw from the air you see on these posters. It was unbelievable. It just, all I could think about World War II and some pictures you see on TV of what some of those cities looked like after they were bombed. I saw it. We all saw it. Felt it. We all felt it, either directly or indirectly. It hurt everyone to see our community so devastated. The outpouring of support and offers of assistance, as the judge pointed out, were overwhelming. So many people came forward and wanted to help, and they would not take no for an answer. I got to tell you, that's the one thing I remember. You could not tell people to go home that we really didn't need their help at this point in time. They just were adamant that they wanted to help. And in order to deal with that tremendous number of volunteers, Bob, you'll remember this, we assigned Sue Fowler to coordinate all of those volunteers and then put them in places where they could be, where they were needed. It was a tremendous job on her part. And it was the one thing that we never considered in our disaster planning, Andy, was how to deal with all the people that came forward and wanted to help. We all felt it, worked it. What a great job everyone did, from our public safety personnel to public works. No one was hurt after that tornado because of the effort, as I said, of our police and fire personnel. And I can tell you one thing that comes to mind about the police and fire, you know, that we were involved with that for days after the event actually took place. Our firefighters and police officers were going through those homes in those areas. We could not get them to go home. I don't know how many hours those police and fire worked, but none of them wanted to go home. They wanted to stay and help. I think it took the fire chief and the police chief actually had to make some of them go home because after a while, you know, fatigue sets in. But they really were dedicated to our community and our citizens. And then what a job our public works people did. And I've already recognized Bob. And as I said, we all remember the mounds of debris that was at the sports center. How many of you remember that? How those big, huge stacks of debris, almost as high as the sports center itself. And Bob knew that his mission was to get those streets clear, get that debris out of those neighborhoods as quick as we possibly could. And they did it. And in order to quickly do it, we had to have a place to take that stuff. And it was the sports center. And after days, I don't know how many days later, Bob works out the idea of creating the burn pit out at the air park. And the debris was moved to the air park and it was burned out there. And that fire, how many days, I don't know how long that fire burned out there, but the people that we hired did a tremendous job because they kept that fire so hot, it kept the smoke and sparks down. They were good at it. They knew what they were doing. And then the other thing we did that I was pleased with is the day after the tornado, we went to the Public Works building, and we set up there because this was going to be primarily a cleanup job. And we met out there every morning and gave this community a progress report on where we were with restoring power, with picking up the debris, and dealing with other issues. The judge mentioned it, the fly-by-night contractors that came in here, and informing our community about those kind of issues. You know, Andy said disasters can happen anywhere, anytime, and I think that was one of the lessons from that tornado, because who would have thought in Owensboro, Kentucky, in January, that we would have a tornado? And the lesson from that was, you better be prepared. You better be prepared. We had planned for months for the big event that became a non-event, Y2K. But I've got to tell you, all of that planning paid off that night. And I'll end by telling you that, like everyone have said, we live in a tremendous community, and you let something happen here, whether it's a 97 flood, a 2000 tornado, or an ice storm, or whatever it is, everybody comes together to help their neighbor. I don't want to live any other place. Thank y'all.
All right, let's give them another round of applause. A lot of behind-the-scenes hours put in, so it's a lot of hard work, and Al can definitely attest to that, and the commissioners can attest to it as well. Next speaker we've got coming up is a good friend of mine. He's also a reverend, but he's a meteorologist at National Weather Service in Paducah. Please welcome my friend Rick Shanklin.
All right, appreciate the opportunity to be here this morning. You know, I was just thinking, I'm in my 36th year in the weather business, and this is one of those events that really stands out to me in several regards. The time of the year, certainly that, but certainly the devastation it caused and how the community came together here. That was really neat to see. I've seen it in some of we cover parts of 4 states, and some hasn't gone quite so well, and some really led very well, and that certainly was the case here. And speaking of that, this event really propelled Davis County, Owensboro-Davis County, to become the first storm-ready community between Chicago and Atlanta. And now there's hundreds. And so you're talking about leading by example. Many of those communities, especially, you know, within 100, 200 miles of here, saw Owensboro-Davis County become storm ready and followed suit. So that was definitely one of the big positive things that came out of that. So yeah, I want to give you an overview, and I'm going to kind of do it from a chronology standpoint. First, leading up to the tornado. And you know, we know things just aren't right when it's January 3rd and temperatures are at or above 70. The high in Evansville was 69, a low of just 53 that morning. But, you know, temperatures that warm, you at least set the stage for something bad to happen. You got to have other things in play, but not good when it warms up. So those of you that like really warm temperatures in the wintertime, quit doing that. Don't like them. You want cold temperatures. Like it was actually a day or two after the tornado. Also, I didn't realize this much rain fell. 4.94 inches of rain fell the time and leading up to the tornado that day. So lots of rainfall in the region as well. So temperatures were warm, and we had a front in the area. And, you know, that's one of the other ingredients that can potentially cause some issues. And so we didn't like seeing that either, and that led us to the concern. It's a little bit hard digging out some of the old graphics and all, but I was able to find this Storm Prediction Center outlook. That's the ones that gives the outlook, and they issue the watches. They're part of our agency. And we had a slight risk across the area. And that's, of the categories now, that's actually a level 2 of level 5. A moderate is a level 3. But really the concern for tornadoes was further to the south in the moderate risk area. But yet, one of the statements I had, strong to severe storms already in progress. That was, I think this was the like 7:30 that morning update. Already in progress through a large part of the mid and lower Mississippi Valley, and will gradually spread eastward into the lower Ohio and Tennessee valleys. And unfortunately that became true, and they were severe and even tornadic, as we found out. Now, that wasn't the first tornado of the day. In fact, the very first one kind of associated with this area of storms was in extreme northeast Arkansas. And then we had a tornado that was generated into Crittenden County, set down in the community of Crane. It was also an F3, a little bit not quite as strong as the one here at Owensboro, but did tremendous damage there too. Fortunately, it was a much less populated area. So we saw that. That was an hour plus before the tornado eventually hit here in Owensboro. But it's sometimes not good when you've got little squiggles in lines of storms like that, and that was the case there. So looking at the velocity data to see if there is rotation within the storm, we saw clearly a circulation there. And this was a tornado location near Crane or just past Crane in Crittenden County at 3:15. So less than an hour before the storm. 55, 60 miles an hour, which really is not terribly uncommon in early January or any time in the winter months because you have very strong, much stronger winds than in the warmer parts of the year in the atmosphere that propel the storms. But it was, we knew then it was in line to head toward Owensboro. You know, many times something will happen and it'll go one way or another or maybe not produce another tornado, but certainly the concern was there. And here we are 50 minutes later, and we still have this strong circulation. It's strengthened again, unfortunately, as it was heading toward the city here, about to bear down. In fact, this was just about a minute before touchdown out to the southwest of the airport. So we had issued the tornado warning for Davis County, having trouble finding the warnings, but was able to find this. Back then, by the way, we issued warnings for whole counties. I'm so glad we don't anymore. It was totally unnecessary given this event. We knew it was just affecting a very small part of any of the three counties here, mainly Davis County. But the tornado warning was issued at 3:43 p.m. It was about 23 minutes before the tornado hit. So we issued the tornado warning, and about that time, Beverly Poole, who is now retired, she was a meteorologist in charge of the National Weather Service in Paducah at the time. She typically made the calls, and she called Richard Payne, and this is a call he says he will never forget, and he might talk about this more later, I'm not sure, but basically to say that, you know, we're really concerned the tornado's headed right toward Owensboro, and the one quote there, hang in there, and God bless you, and we'll see you afterwards. And so he knew, you know, of course, a lot of that is in the voice inflection and that kind of thing, but that really weighed heavy on him. He knew how serious the concern was there. You know, we issued a few tornado warnings. You know, a county may be under a few tornado warnings in a given year, but this was definitely one that was at a different level than others, and that was relayed in that call. So that's what happened prior to the event. So the facts from the event, at least reported to us, were 18 injuries. Many times if you do a little research, you'll find there's at least some other minor injuries out there, but around 20 injuries. And as was already said, you know, the fantastic thing, no fatalities. And we have all seen tornadoes much less intense than this one that caused, in some cases, numerous fatalities. So there were some things that were done right. Certainly the preparedness actions and with the emergency management with Richard and Walter Atherton and others involved in that came into play, of course, the warning and so forth. 1,200 homes and businesses damaged. The count we had 101 destroyed, 573 with major damage. Tornado rating, again, F3. Now, that was under the old scale. Now we have the EF scale. It would just be an EF3 now versus an F3. The winds would be a bit different. The scales are a bit different. Path length, 7 miles. The maximum width, this was a huge tornado, up to a half a mile wide. A quarter-mile wide tornado is a huge tornado. So massive path of destruction, several major landmarks damaged. Of course, the Apollo High School here at Kentucky Wesleyan College, and the former Winn-Dixie store, which is now Owensboro Health, just up the street here. So again, the tornado warning was issued at 3:43. At 4:06 p.m. thereabouts, it was the touchdown southwest of the airport near Rome. 4:10 p.m. it was the first report to the National Weather Service of tornado damage, and that was at Tamarack and Carter Road. 4:12 p.m., tornado lifted over downtown here, and the initial estimates from FEMA, working with Richard and Company, was $70.4 million. I've heard $85 million and different numbers since then, but very damaging tornado. One thing that bothered me is we did not have a good tornado track, so I spent quite a bit of time this week trying to redevelop the track from the damage surveying that myself and others from the office did here, then different accounts and so forth. And here is the track as best I could determine in its inclusiveness there. Zooming in a little bit, you can see a little more. Got several damage points on there. But that is the track. And some of the damage, is Dale Harris here by chance? Took these pictures. This is out not too terribly far from the airport in the Tamarack Park area, I think it's called, that neighborhood, just southwest of Apollo High School. This is the Seventh-day Adventist Church. I forget if this is on Tamarack or another road, but in that area. And, of course, KWC right here. Eddie said he thought this was one of the dorms here on campus that was damaged. There's some pictures I took, mostly of the apartment complex just up the road from here. Some of the injuries, I think, occurred there. Here's, by the way, just the official storm data record. So we have to submit an official record that goes to a national archive, the National Center for Environmental Information in Asheville, North Carolina. So it'll be available 500 or 1,000 years from now or whatever, potentially. Top weather event for 2000, this was it. So we cover parts of 4 states, and we go through in different criteria, but there were a lot of really bad events that year, but this one was unfortunately at the top of the list in our rankings. And in with this is just an overview of the storm reports for that particular day, just to show you that the event didn't occur just here. This weather system, again, it caused a tornado in northeast Arkansas down into Mississippi. There were several tornadoes there. I don't think any were as strong. I think this one was the strongest, and then Crane and Crittenden County second. But a bunch of wind reports and hail reports to the southwest of here as well. So pretty bad weather day, and again, warm temperatures and all, that can lead to that. And that's what I have for you. So thank you. And
all right. Most of you will know the next speaker, one fashion or another. My predecessor, a good friend of mine, definitely a mentor since I've got out of the Air Force emergency management and come into the civilian side, taking over for the reins from him. Hard shoes to fill. Did a tremendous job for this community over the years, whether a police officer or emergency management. But everybody, please welcome Richard Payne, my predecessor.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me. Reed, Ron, I'm sorry that you got 5 minutes. They gave me 20. But anyway, no. They were always giving me a hard time when I got up to speak, and they said, you got 3 minutes. That's all you got because you talk too much. But anyway, I will be very brief. Things have already been said that I feel like the late Buzz Norris, the county judge executive here, he used to tell me, he'd jump on me before or after a interview. He said, next time let me speak first, because they've already said everything I was going to say. So I feel like that now. But anyway, I can't say enough. I don't want to keep bringing it up, but part of my job as an emergency manager for the city and county was to prepare our citizens, school systems, one thing after another, to be prepared for whatever might hit and to work and coordinate with our public safety partners, if you will, through the preparedness issues. What I can't say enough is right after the situation, well, we got the, like Ricky said, we got the call from the Weather Service, and it was definitely a sobering minute when Beverly said, you know, this is what you're facing, this is what we're seeing overhead. It could touch down at any time. God bless you, and we'll see you when it's over with. Well, the late Walter Atherton, who was a warning coordinator for my office at that time, he said, I'm going to keep in touch with the radar like we'd been doing all day long and listening to every resource that we could about what might be approaching and how bad it could be, but you never know exactly if it's going to hit or not. Sometimes you get fortunate and it goes over top of you. We've had events that we thought we were going to be devastated by a tornado, and it go right over top of us and keep on going. So at that time I said, well, if you keep an eye on the radar, I'm going out on the street. I want to see if anything has happened, and if so, if we've had a touchdown or a near miss or whatever it might be. And I didn't run into anything until I hit 25th and Frederica, and I saw the Winn-Dixie, the wall that had fallen down on all the cars. Then I look up, and at the time I had Jeff Jones with me, who is now our coroner, but he was working with the Sheriff's Department at that time. And he said, well, look right up in front of you. We're going to have to dodge the telephone poles that were like this across Frederica Street, those of you that went out that way. And I got a call from City Manager Ron at that time. Get back here, we got to open up the command center. We've got a situation. I said, you're telling me you're not seeing what I'm seeing out here? It's bad. So we turned around the Roosevelt House, the area there, and Jeff said to me, he said, man, we can't go back. Look in front of you. There was a car about this high off the ground, and we were scared to death there could be somebody inside of it. So we jumped out to check on it and found out later that the roof off of the apartment complex on Sherman Road had blown over and fell on this car. And of course the Roosevelt houses themselves, the wind itself had used it, kind of given a boomerang, if you will, to the buildings, and it stacked cars up behind the Roosevelt house itself. So it was a terrible looking situation at that point in time. So we left there. Wasn't long after that we hear from OMU. I don't know whether Bob Carper made it here today or not, but they showed up at the command center saying, you have no idea how bad it got out there. We saw a cloud on the ground thinking it was a rain situation, and we figured out that it was a rain wrapped tornado, if you will. And about the time we jumped up from the office to take cover, it broke through. Anyway, the situation got worse as we ran along, but got back to the command center, and as everything Ron said is how it went. But not only that, OMU working with what they had, their building had not completely destroyed, but done a heck of a mess, so they're having to work on top of that. And it wasn't just trying to rebuild or fix things, rebuild the infrastructure, so to speak, like Ron and Reed said. We had to clear the roads, we had to clear the debris out of the way. It was a tremendous job getting that, because our fire and police were doing exactly what they should have been doing, the search and rescue effort throughout the community, checking the houses, seeing who was there and who wasn't, and then trying to get things at least somewhat prepared in case, trying to get ambulances through, fire trucks through. It's just one thing after another. So it was an event that we've talked about, we've tried to prepare for it. But just like when we approached that event at the area, at 25th and Frederica, that's when it hits, reality hits you in the face and says, it really hit here this time. We've got a major situation. So we're setting up shelters. Our Southern Baptist Relief group that came in and set up kitchens to cook food for the people. The Red Cross, who took it by their herbs throughout the community. National Guard, as Ron said, that came in, did a flyover, do some immediate, I guess you'd say, preliminary damage assessment. Them helping out as far as debris removal and those kinds of things. Salvation Army, St. Vincent de Paul, the Seventh-day Adventists lost their church, but they controlled the resources. They helped us pretty much managed resources out of the, what was it, Winn-Dixie there, where First Owensboro Christian is now. So we managed resources out of there. Family assistance centers. Another part of our job was to work with the state, work with the federal agencies that come in, Small Business Administration, one thing after another, after the event. So I remember we were talking about this earlier. The governor came to do a walk through the community. We were walking through some of the community, and just to see things that we didn't expect. As we were looking at the different homes, they couldn't figure out why the plug-ins and light switches were gone out of the walls. Happened 2 or 3 homes in there, and they said, what's going on? At first we didn't know. So later on we figured out it raised the roof. When it raised the roof on the house, it pulled the wiring and stuff up through the attic. Got to looking further, some of the people that fought, and we had to bring in the Kentucky Insurance Commission to some of this, but they were people to sign off on checks, one thing after another. When we finally got those people in here and got to looking further, we found out some of the foundations, it actually moved them to a certain extent, so the houses had to be taken down. So here we go with shelters. We got the pouring out of the community, though, was unreal. We had a lot of people in shelters, but that wasn't the point. The point is that families came in and took their people out of the shelters, and it was just coming together. Volunteers, Ron said, from way off. They were. The farthest one that I remember was a carpentry unit out of Montana. They were here for like 4 hours before we realized they'd even showed up. And the sad thing about it was, it wasn't a planned event. They just volunteered. They wanted to help. So they were here before we was at that part of the recovery, I guess you would say. But things are what they are. One thing that hit me, fire department called me out to Elmwood, said, you got to come out here and see this. I don't know if there's pictures here to that extent or not, but the, is it mausoleum is what it's called there? The glass was blown completely out. Debris all over the inside of the building. Podium, no bigger square than this, sitting in the middle of the floor with a Bible still sitting on it open in a certain page, and it said, the wrath of God. And I said, ooh, you know, it was, okay. But afterwards, going back through the Roosevelt house, it sucked out curtains. It sucked out mattresses off that end as it came past. And, you know, you just thank God that those people weren't there. They happened to be visiting families at that time, and they weren't in it. But thank God they wasn't, because one thing we saw, like you see the doors over here, they were solid steel doors. It sucked them in to the extent that you couldn't open them. And doing some of the damage assessment after that, Texas A&M got a hold of that. They said, Richard, if you don't care, we're going to send a group of graduate students to see you, because we do, under federal grants, what I want to say, research on tornadoes and their effects. So they came in and did a large study of that, and hopefully they took that back to help for future. But there was a big joke that, like Ron said about the Y2K, they put out. They said we were so busy preparing for Y2K we didn't see the tornado coming. But I think, as he said, as much as we try to do to prepare for such things, it's never enough. But thank goodness we had coordinated with every agency involved, whether it was police, fire, whoever. We all worked together in this situation, and I think probably because of so much planning getting ready for that, it worked out even better. But like Andy said earlier, disasters can and do present themselves at the most inconvenient time. Being prepared can reduce the fear, anxiety, and the losses that accompany them. But I think anything we can do will ensure the survival of our families being the most important thing. And another thing I remember, a lady came to me when Governor Patton was walking through with so many of them, and she said, my daughter pointed you out and said, I wanted to tell you, I know the schools do a lot, but preparedness means a lot to us now. I said, great, I'm glad to hear that. She said, well, that's not what I mean. She said, my daughter came and guided us to take us to safety from what she learned from your classes and the different things that the teachers and one after another have tried to teach. We were too busy trying to see the storm. We wanted to see the tornado. If it hadn't been for our child taking us, the after effects might have been bad. So, again, we can never prepare enough, like was said before, but we want to continue to do so. I think a lot of us, like's been said today, have forgotten the 2000 tornado. But it can and probably will happen again at the most inconvenient time. So thank you for having it. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Richard. All right, before I hand the mic over to the judge, I just want to point out what we've got going on in the back. On the left side, facing the back, is a slideshow of pictures, whether we have them in files from Richard's former staff, or we got them from photographers such as Hubert Powers, or citizens gave them to us. Some of them just handed them to us. Some of us sent them in. We got, how many pictures? 150, something like that, on the slideshow on the left. The path of destruction is there in the center. That's a former graphic that was in the Messenger Inquirer. You probably are familiar with that. And on the right side, a video was given to me a few days ago by Larry Brown. Where are you at? Yeah, back in the back, the former owner, operator of Ohio Valley Two-Way. They were talking about the damage at OMU and OMU having to work around that. That video actually, I believe, starts at OMU, and then you'll see them traveling throughout the community showing the various damage. It doesn't show 100% of the damage, but it does show a good bit of it. What we're going to do now is, like I said, we're going to hand it over. We want to hear stories from, I'm sure there's a ton of unheard stories out there regarding this tornado, but I'm going to start with my boss and your judge, Executive Al Mack.
Thanks, Andy. First off, Mayor and Judge and Andy, I think we should have put a muzzle on Richard before we let him up there. And anybody that thinks that they're going to be able to talk as long as that boy did, I control the mic. So, Andy asked if I would start out with a story. Back in 2000, way before I ever considered going into local government or public service, I was a plumbing, heating, cooling contractor. My shop was north of Parish Avenue. And the afternoon of the tornado, I heard the sirens going off. And I went to the door and I looked out and I go, those dum-dums, they've given us another false alarm, like Richard used to do quite a bit. So I walked back in and I talked to the girls in the office. I said, look, if something happens, we've got a big safe, the steel door and concrete, you guys get in there. They continue to go off, so I go to the door, I look west, down towards Sargo, sunny, bright, not a cloud in the sky. I walked outside the door, looked kind of to the southwest, and it was a little dark back there. Walked back in the shop, and about that time, our two-way radio crackled, and one of my guys was on the radio, and he was crying. And he said, my God, send help, the neighborhood has exploded. That's when the tornado hit that Tamarack Park area. I told the girls, get in the safe. I hopped in a truck. Dum-dum me, I didn't get in the safe. I hopped in the truck and headed out that way. I finally made it to Rudy Martin Drive, and there's a picture of one of the houses over on Rudy Martin Drive to where they were working. I had 3 guys there. The family was at home. The family had taken cover, and they were okay. Thank you, Lord. And in the pantry, my guys had taken cover, and they were okay. Bathroom, pantry, and that's all that was left of that house, down to the concrete slab. The entire neighborhood was that way. So we started helping, and by the way, I want to say a thank you to Kenergy and Big Rivers and to Atmos Energy and to all those utility companies that came out and worked tirelessly, and the folks that were sent in to help OMU restore power. I mean, it was a huge job to do that. But we started through the neighborhood, knocking on doors, opening doors, seeing if everybody was